Second Great Awakening is part of the whole reform of the early 1800s. How did the deists disagree? Well, the deists are really Unitarians, which is the next term if you want to hit it real fast. Kind of a cold, unemotional religion. A lot of the Unitarians, their children became transcendentalists. They did not believe in an activist God. God just created things and then goes away. Charles Finney was the key speaker for the Great Awakening. Once again, there's the issue of who has the right answer. There were a lot of people who felt disassociated from their religion, so they joined the new churches that formed, like the Mormons, the Shakers, the Millerites. There's a lot of poverty in America by 1820, the 1830s, 1840s, and a lot of people that are economically disadvantaged join those new churches because they feel a sense of community. Okay. The new religions are Mormons or LDS. The Millerites become the Seventh-day Adventists. They're the ones who predicted the end of the world. The Shakers, Mother Ann Lee, and the celibate people, okay, who shook with religious emotion. Unitarianism, we already did. Utopians, mostly transcendentalists, set up perfectionist communities where they felt everybody would live in peace and harmony. So we're going to set up a community, all of us in here together. We're all going to share. So we're all going to work for the betterment of the community, okay? And we'll all put in 4 hours of labor a day, and if we all work to the best of our ability, that should be enough, and then we can spend the rest of the time in intellectual pursuit. Sounds like a great plan. The problem is that Ben only wants to work 1 hour a day.
No.
Samir doesn't want to work at all. Carter wants to work 10 hours a day. Okay? Pretty soon Carter begins to resent the fact that Ben only wants to work 1 hour a day, or that he's squirreling away his own personal money. He's not sharing with the whole community, or whatever the case might be. So these communities did not work out at the end. Because the problem with perfectionist communities is you need perfectionist people. And nobody's perfect. Hawthorne lived in one of these communities for a while and just gave it up for the ghost. He hated it. Early 1800s feminists, their goals, women of the 19th century supported what? The most important goals for antebellum feminists was to get equal legal rights. That women could own property, women could sign contracts, women could represent themselves in court, those things, okay? Secondary in antebellum America was getting the right to vote. Getting the right to vote is really a late 1800s, early 1900s goal. Okay? Which movement were most antebellum women involved in? Pacifism, temperance movement, women's suffrage, workers' rights, or immigrants? Temperance. And temperance means no drinking. Why were women involved in that? Because they were the ones who suffered when their husbands went out and drank up the paycheck, beat them or their children because they were drunk, whatever the case might be. The other movement a lot of antebellum women were involved in was the abolitionist movement. Those are the two biggies for women. There's a cartoon of a man with a beer, like you see a big beer mug with, you know, the foamy head on the beer, beating his family. What is it? Protesting the right for people to drink, so it's for temperance, whatever. Seneca Falls Convention, 1848, women got together. If you see something that says, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men and women are created equal, that's Seneca Falls. It was a document outlining why women should have legal equality to men. They threw in at the last minute the right to vote. It's the one thing that didn't get unanimous support at the convention. There were a lot of women, and this goes to the struggle for a right to vote, there were a lot of women who felt politics were dirty. And that if women voted, they would be tainted by the political dirt. So it would be better for them to keep their pureness about them, okay, and not have the right to vote. The legal status of women in the early 1800s, if you were a single woman, you were treated pretty equally to men on a legal basis in terms of the land ownership, that kind of thing. If you were a married woman, you no longer owned your property, your husband did. In the early 1800s, if a man and his wife got divorced, the children stayed with the man. Women couldn't vote. Women couldn't get loans, those kinds of things. The struggle for right to vote really is an issue of the late 1800s, though it's introduced in this period of time. Lucretia Mott was one of the people who started the Seneca Falls Convention, along with Elizabeth Cady Stanton. The quote would have called for women having equal legal rights. Okay? Remember that the women's movement came from the abolitionist movement because the abolitionist movement treated them meanly and wouldn't give them equal rights to hear speeches and give speeches and that kind of thing. So many of them broke off and started the feminist movement. American Colonization Society was an organization set up for manumission, and manumission means buying slaves' freedom. Okay? Their intent was to buy slaves' freedom and then do what? Send them to Africa. Specifically the country of Liberia. Okay, they bought land there for them. About 1,400 slaves this happened to them in the early 1800s. Freedom was purchased, they were put on ships and taken over to Liberia. Why didn't it happen more? Well, the cotton gin comes in, and suddenly slaves are in great demand. So people, rather than manumitting their slaves, sell them because they still support this institution of slavery. A lot of slaves themselves were not real eager to go back to Africa because they were second, third, fourth, fifth generation Americans. They spoke no African languages. They didn't know what religion people there were. They were American for all practical purposes. Abolitionism means to abolish slavery. Feminist support, most definitely. You get people like the Gremke sisters who came from a slave-owning family in the Carolinas who were big workers. You have ex-slave women like Sojourner Truth who go out and speak. You have women like Harriet Beecher Stowe who, work to promote abolitionism. She writes Uncle Tom's Cabin, which is an abolitionist literature. Why did abolitionist movement, goals, I'm sorry, this is very important. Abolitionism generally had two goals. One was the immediate emancipation of slaves, and the second one was uncompensated emancipation. And the person who most loudly talks about immediate and uncompensated emancipation of slaves is Garrison. He's 2 terms down below that, William Lloyd Garrison, who was a white abolitionist who started a newspaper called The Liberator. Okay. Why did the abolitionist group break into factions? They broke into factions based on what the role of women should be, active or passive role. And Garrison wanted them to take an active role. Women wanted an active role. There were those who were stuffy shirts who wanted them in a passive role. We couldn't hear about slave women being raped because women shouldn't hear about things like that. Gag rule, put into place in Congress to stop any discussion about slavery. Okay, the person who eventually got the gag rule overturned and got rid of it was John Quincy Adams as a congressman. It took him a long time, but he finally got rid of it. It really violates freedom of speech if you think about it. It would be like putting a gag rule in Congress right now about gun reform or whatever. We can't talk about gun reform. So, think how people would react to that. Frederick Douglass, leading black abolitionist, to run away from slavery, great orator, wrote a lot of articles for The Liberator as well as his life story. He's responsible for getting black units to fight in the Civil War. His goal is to show that black men are equal to white men so they'll get the right to vote. If he had been alive, which he wasn't, he would have been a big supporter of W.E.B. Du Bois, not Booker T. Washington. He would have been for blacks getting total equality, or he was for blacks getting total equality.